everyone, and welcome to The Well. Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to see everything we have going on, you can visit our website, yourwellchurch.org. And while you're there, if you're a visitor, you can fill out a digital connect card, just as a way for us to get to know one another. If you've been giving or would like to give today, thank you so much. You are what makes our ministry possible. You can give directly from our website, or you can use the PushPay app on your phone. Or if those don't work for you, you can write out a check and mail it directly to us. And you'll see our address right here on the screen. We're about to get started, so let's go in and join the worship team.
Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 Amen.
God is love, for God so loved the world, the whole world, not just my world. God so loved every person in this world and sent Jesus to teach us what love looks like.
प्यार सहनशील होता है.
L'amour est plein de bonté. L'amour.
El amor no es envidia.
Liefde pronkt niet.
Любовь не гордится.
사랑에는 실패가 없다.
L'amour pas égoïste.
Tình yêu sẽ chẳng dễ dàng nóng giận.
Iagapik saknaito kako puekun kani.
प्रेमलाई दुष्टमा प्रसन्न गर्दैन.
المحبة تفرح في الحق.
ভালোবাসা সর্বদা রক্ষা করে.
Amor sempre confirma.
Liebe sucht nicht seinen eigenen Vorteil.
Amour toujours persévérer.
Since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. To love every person, every nationality, every background, every history, every soul. Because in life we find faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Welcome to The Well. Happy Blur's Day. Why is it Blur's Day? Because every day feels like a blur. It's been so crazy. I think probably the two most intelligent people on our planet was Doug and Bob, who got into a rocket and they left to the space station for a little while. One comedian said this last week that God's probably sitting up there thinking, I should have stopped with the dinosaurs. In light of all the craziness, one of the things I take courage in is that no matter how nuts things got, Jesus never ran away from problems. He always marched towards the problems. And I want to read a passage from the book of Luke. Luke chapter 9, verse 51 says, As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. He knew that if he headed towards Jerusalem, it meant death. But he went there anyways. He didn't run away from it. And I think that we need to have the same mentality, that we don't run from the problems, or we don't hide in a corner, but we face it resolutely, just like Jesus would. I'm excited to talk to real people today after talking to a camera for the longest time. It's nice to have some friends here in the room. And I just want us to imagine that this is just a conversation where there's eavesdroppers, but these eavesdroppers have the habit of saying amen whenever they like something. So we're just going to imagine that they're giving us an amen as they hear some good points that are being made. But we're just going to have a conversation. And Donna Cole was going to be here with us today. That's Jerome's wife, my spiritual twin. We call each other twins because we have the same sarcastic personality. And we've had a lot of good experiences. And Jerome always balances us out. Jerome has the eyebrow that a little bit like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, even more intimidating. So he keeps us balanced. And then this is Billy Ball, good friend, and he's a former detective in Milwaukee, and so I felt like he brings a great perspective on both sides of the conversation that we're going to be having today. As a black pastor friend of mine said this last week, this isn't about cops, this is about corruption. And so we want to make sure, me personally, when I dial 911, I'm glad there's first responders who come to my rescue because my dog's definitely not going to do it. She's no lassie. I want people who could be there. But we want to have an honest conversation. And so we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So in light of recent events, I just want to ask you guys a question. I think there's a big difference between listening to the media, listening to talking heads, scrolling through social media, and sitting down with someone that you know. A friend, a family member, and having a conversation. So the question I want to ask initially, what was your initial reaction to George Floyd's death?
Well, I saw it on TV kind of like everybody else. My background's I got 32 years in law enforcement. And I'm still at Marquette University as a police detective. I don't think there's no true law enforcement officer out there that saw that genuine heart that didn't believe that was wrong. Mm-hmm. It was 100% wrong. There's no other way you can cover it.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen nothing like that, and I've never had fortunate to never work with anyone that had that mentality. I mean, there's good and bad in everyone,
Sure.
in every job, and what I saw was one of the worst things I've ever seen.
Mm.
My thing went right back to again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this happens more often than we know. The problem is that we don't know about it most of the time. And when it does come into the media, you don't always hear everything and the truth of what's really going on.
I know for myself, when I watched it, it was one of those things that was really hard. It was like you wanted to turn away. You didn't want to watch it. And on Tuesday, I joined the protest. And I think it's important for us to distinguish between protest and looting and rioting. They're not the same thing. And yet they are often talked about as if they're all kind of combined together. But I was part of the peaceful protest, and I went and I kneeled for 9 minutes. And it was important for me to do that for a couple of reasons. One is the solidarity. But as I was kneeling, I couldn't believe how long 9 minutes was. That's a long time. And as I was kneeling there, I kept imagining, what if this was my kid? And then the crowd all started chanting, breathe, breathe, breathe. And my heart just broke. Because I've got several friends who've all shared experiences of inequality, of injustice, of racism. And so for me, it wasn't just about that moment. It's about all the conversations I've ever had. You know, talking to my brother-in-law who's from Jamaica, and every time he would drive through a certain area, how he would get pulled over, or I was talking to a pastor friend of mine just recently. He was at Jewel and he had his mask on because of COVID. He's a black gentleman, and a white guy stopped him and said, I bet you're thankful that you can wear a mask and nobody's going to question you about it, because now you can rob places and nobody think twice. He's a pastor. He's a grandfather. He's got kids. Nicest guy you'll ever meet, but just because he's black, he's automatically assumed to be a criminal. And for me, that's what this moment is about. Yes, it's about George Floyd, but it's more than that. You know, it's about a history that we need to be dealing with, and that we need to be talking about, and having an open dialogue. So I want to ask you just personally, because I've talked to several friends, have you experienced yourself racism or injustice or inequality in your daily life? And if so, give an example.
Yeah, all my life.
Your whole life?
My whole life. When we were teenagers growing up, we liked to play basketball. So we went to a white area where they were going to let us in to play basketball in there. We're parked on the street, and all of a sudden you got 6 cop cars coming all around you because you're parked on the street and it's a car full of black guys. I'm sitting in the back seat, and he's asking me the questions, and I'm not even driving. You know, and it's like, what do you want from me? You know, but all my life it's been one thing after another.
What about you, Billy?
I can start off like in the 80s. Me and my wife got married. I'm black, she's white. We got married in 83, so we actually had to search for a pastor that would perform the service. And we ended up having a service at Lincoln Park.
So there were pastors that wouldn't do it.
Correct, there's pastors that wouldn't do it because I was black and she was white. You push ahead to 1988 when I got in the police force in Milwaukee. It was fine. It was maybe 30% African American, maybe 60% white. By 1989, they decided that they wanted to diversify the city. So predominantly Milwaukee was set up that the African American people were on the north side, the Hispanic people would be on a portion of the south side, and the white people would be on the farther southwest side. So they decided they wanted to diversify the city. So in '89, which is not that long ago, they decided to put black officers on the south side. So people would call for service. A black officer would go to the door and they would be told by the person and called for police services, I'm not allowing you into my house. They would actually call up to the police district, talk to whatever commander's there and say, send me a white officer. I'm not letting this officer take my complaint.
Wow.
So that's kind of how it's
So even though you're in uniform, you're a police officer, and then...
Correct. And I'll even jump to, now we're in 2000, we can go to 2000, maybe 15. Me and my wife are going down to, making it down to Florida. We stop in Tennessee, it's about 1 o'clock at night. We're trying to find a hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
I go in 2 hotel rooms and it's by Nashville. So I go in 2 hotel rooms in Nashville around 1 o'clock. I'm told no. All the hotels here in town are booked up for some biking event. The closest place is about 20 miles from where I came from.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried one more hotel, and I told my wife to go in.
Mm-hmm.
It was what? She came out 5 minutes later with a hotel key. And miraculously, we were able to go in a hotel for that night.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So I mean, racism out there. There's different subtleties of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be aware of it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely out there.
Yeah. I think one of the things that bothers me as I have conversations with different ones is that you'll have some groups who are like, well, it doesn't exist anymore. You know, Emancipation Proclamation, you know, 1960s, all these different things. And that's where I'm like, but have you sat down and talked to? I mean, every black person I know that I've had a conversation with has stories like what you're sharing. You know, it's very much active. It's very much alive. And I've been thinking a lot this last week about something Martin Luther King Jr. said. He says, it's not the words of our enemies that hurt the most. It's the silence of our friends. And that's why these conversations are so important, is that people need to know that this is live. And I was thinking about something else. You're talking about kind of like the subtleties. And this is something that really got me as a parent. There's an 18-year-old named Cameron Welch who talked about rules his mom has taught him. This is a TikTok that has gone around. And he says, you know, his mom tells him that when you go out in public, here's some rules that you have to follow because you're a black man. Don't put your hands in your pockets, ever, because you don't want anyone thinking that you have a weapon. Don't touch anything you're not buying. Never leave the store without a receipt or a bag, even if it's a pack of gum.
Yep.
Never leave the house without your ID. Talking about your situation. Don't drive with a wife beater on. Don't drive with a do-rag on. Don't stare at a Caucasian woman ever. And what got me about that is I have 3 boys. I've never had that conversation. I've never had to sit down and explain to them, okay, if a cop pulls you over, make sure you put your hands up on the steering wheel, make sure you repeat what the officer says. You know, when you're in the store, make sure you don't put your hands in your pockets. And that shows the disparity between what I'm experiencing versus what you're experiencing. And that's what I think people don't realize is that it's not enough to say, I'm not a racist. I think we need to be able to say, I'm against racism. That we go the extra mile, that we stand up for those who are our brothers and our sisters. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. I want your kids to be treated the same way my kids are treated. I want you to be treated the same way I'm treated. And that has to be our heartbeat. That has to be what we're fighting for. Martin Luther also said 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour of the week. Do you feel like that has changed all that much since the 1960s? You talk about not being able to find a pastor until you got down the line a few pastors before you could find one who would perform the ceremony. Have you ever experienced, and for me this is kind of one of the crux of why I want to have this conversation, is I feel like the church should be the ones who's getting it right. But I fear that we don't always do a great job. So what's been your experience?
He's right. I mean, I've been to a lot of churches. A lot of the churches that I go to are mixed. And they announce that sometimes. You know, we're the very most mixed church around here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is that telling me? You got 300 members, and you got maybe 20 blacks, Hispanic. So you're mixed.
Mm-hmm.
No. You know, I mean, it's segregated because different reasons. It's not always racism. It's just the styles, what they grow up with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a lot of different things that come with it. I don't like to go to a church that sings country music. That's just me.
Me either.
But the fact is, if the pastor has a good message I can learn from, I can get by that.
Sure.
But there's some black churches I don't go into because I don't need all that hooping and hollering, running around the chairs and all that stuff. Give me a message that I can live by and I can grow by. Other than that, you can keep it.
Yeah. Revelation chapter 7, verse 9 through 10 says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.'" That's what the church is supposed to look like. That is the reflection of heaven, is that everyone is coming together. And I love the fact that there's still the distinction. Because some people like to say, I'm colorblind. Well, God's not colorblind. And God created the various colors. God created the various cultures. You know, the goal isn't to be colorblind. The goal is to celebrate and to see that all of us have been created in God's image with our diversity. And so they all come together and they're worshiping. And what I find interesting is Lifeway just put out some research that says only 2 out of 10 churches are considered diverse right now. 2 out of 10 are considered diverse. And now this is an improvement since the 60s. I don't know if you're aware of this or you remember this, but in the 1960s they would have kneel-ins. And kneel-ins is where black people would go to a white church in the South, and they would kneel outside, just wanting to be a part of the worship, wanting to be a part of the prayer, wanting to be a part of the service, and weren't allowed in. How does that exist? You know, how do you have people who say, I want to worship just like you. I want to be able to pray. I want to be able to participate, and you're not even allowed in the building. So while we've taken some steps forward, and there is some more, and I guess for me, one of the tests is it's not enough to have, and this is true for all diversity, but it's not enough just to have a black person in your church. Are they in your life? And you will find churches that celebrate, oh, we're so diverse. We have black people, we have Hispanic people. But when it comes to who's been to your house, whose house have you been to? You know, how much actual interaction, how much life are you really doing together? How much of it's acquaintances versus how much is actually friendship? You know, do you know the story? I mean, when I heard about what happened with Anna, first I came over and I brought flowers over, which is small, but I just wanted her to know that Uncle Dan loves her and wants to be there. And you know, your wife sends me stuff all the time. And one of the grandkids is out doing like a little dance contest or something like that. Let me whip, let me nay, you know, sending it over. We need to do life together. Because I think that when that happens, that when you see someone hurting, you do like what Paul says, you mourn with those who mourn. You know? And so I think, yes, we have come a long way since the 60s, but we have so much further to go. So much further to go.
Because the skin color is something that's from where you were born, how you, with the DNA and all that.
It's just melanin.
Yourself is a spirit. And that's the thing I try to get people to understand. You are a spirit. God is a spirit. God created you as a spirit. You're in a house made of dirt, different colors. People don't want to hear that. They want to know that, oh yeah, he's black. Well, no, he's not. He's a spirit. This is what you see as the house that he lives in. It's like going up and down a neighborhood and seeing all the different colored homes, but you don't know who's in the homes. You see? And our problem is we try to define somebody by what they look like and what we've grown up with, what our history tells us. So yeah, to me, this is a tough conversation because inside I boil.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been there too many times.
Sure.
I try to control the things that I do and the things that I say because it's very easy to get out of pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like to talk too long because it bothers me. Go ahead.
I think that one of the problems of racism now is that people don't get together and have conversations like this. You don't understand what's going through the black person's life. I don't understand what's going through every white person's life or Hispanic person's life, life. But I think the lack of communication is what causes a lot of tension with a lot of people. You know, like you were talking about the receipt. I'm sure Jerome has gone to the store and bought one item, and after you buy the item, you pay for it right there at the counter or whatever, and the person standing by the door. When you walk, they watch you, but when you walk out that one item, you kind of like have the receipt in your hand, so you don't get stopped. Am I right? You have the receipt in your hand, so you don't get stopped. Because you put that receipt in your pocket, you're getting stopped. You know.
Sure.
And that's part of people's perception. I've walked around many stores and had people, security guard looking at me and all this other stuff. I mean, on some occasions I said, "Hey, I know what you're doing. I'm a cop. You may want to move along. I'm not going to take nothing from you." But in respect, like the police, there are good and bad police, and you're right. If I've sworn to protect, sworn to serve, and if I see something wrong, whether it's a fellow officer doing it or a citizen doing it, it's my job to bring it to justice.
There's a video that's going around that I think is extremely eye-opening. One of the things that you were talking about is how important these conversations are, because we don't know each other. Or the analogy that you gave, it's like all these houses and they can be different colors, but you don't know what's on the inside. There's a video going around where there's a gentleman, he's a black gentleman, and he says, "Before you call the cops, I want you to know something." And he starts going through who he is. He says, "I'm a vegetarian. I'm not proud of it."
Yeah, I saw that video.
I like certain music, but I also like this other. I think he said Oklahoma. I like Oklahoma, and he goes through and he starts describing, and he's speaking to the way that we tend to stereotype, the way we tend to make assumptions. I see a person and I make assumptions. I remember the first time I went to one of my black friend's house when I was like grade school. I go to his house. And we're walking through, and the first thing that really stood out to me is they had this picture of Jesus in the Last Supper, and they were all black. And I remember looking at it, I'm going, "That's not what Jesus looks like." But here's what's funny. Even as a kid, my next thought was, yeah, but Jesus isn't also white with a bunch of pasty, friends who are following him. He's Middle Eastern, And we oftentimes we create these stereotypes, we create these images that are wrong. And so when it comes to tearing it down, I think one of the best steps we can make is get to know each other. Get to know what's on the inside of that house. Get to know what's going on in that person's life so that you don't have that knee-jerk reaction anymore. I've been reading through the prophets a lot, and we'll wrap up here. I mean, it's one of those conversations that you can have for a really long time, and there's a lot to be discussed, but I've been reading through the prophets a lot, and one of the things that is talked over and over and over again throughout the prophets is the need to fight for social justice. Over and over again, God says, your sacrifices, your worship, all these things, they're nice,
Right. They don't mean nothing.
but they don't mean anything when there's a person who's out there who's hungry, when there's a person who's out there who's oppressed, when there's a person who's out there who's hurting. And Isaiah chapter 58 verse 6 says, "Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke." And that's the phrase that really stood out to me. To break every yoke, to not be satisfied with just some progress, but to want to keep fighting until everyone is seen equally. Pastor John Gray said, "My goal isn't to be treated special. My goal is to be treated equal." I'm not looking for special treatment. I'm looking that my kids be treated the same way your kids are treated.
And protest, it's welcome. It shows everyone's concern for what's going on in the world, but unfortunately, there's rioting and looting going on with it. Past 7 days since it's been going on, I've been working 12 to 13-hour days, and you get the true people that want to protest, and they're protesting for a good reason, and that lasts till it starts at 5 and lasts till about 8 o'clock, but by 9 o'clock, you get the people that are, opportunistic. They're out there now, they're in vehicles, they're not even walking, they're in vehicles. Now, by 8 to 9 o'clock, we have 300 vehicles going throughout the city of Milwaukee, and at points they separate. And now they're going out because police concentration is with trying to protect the protesters or listen to protesters. And now they're going out because there's no police out there. They figure they can go out and loot, and that's, I mean, they're hitting every major city in Milwaukee, and you know, so protest is good, but these other outsiders that are jumping onto the protests is taking away from the message that everyone's trying to project throughout the world. So the looting, rioting really just needs to stop.
Yeah. Well, it just detracts from, like you said, the message. You know, that's it. And at the end of the day, what do people then end up focusing on? The looting and the rioting, rather than the message that's being trying to be communicated.
Correct. You're trying to get change, but all they see is the violence that goes along with the message you're trying to give.
Exactly. Let's go ahead and wrap up in prayer. And Jerome, I'd like you to kind of close us in prayer, if you don't mind.
Father God, we thank you that you're around us and protecting us. Lord, I just thank the idea that we can come together and talk about this and have other people's ideas. We're stirring up the gifting inside of people that they may be able to think better, know better, act better. Lord, right now, as we go through this time of crisis, we can only turn to you. We can't turn to anybody else. We know that you know all things and you have set a path before us. You're allowing this to go on for a reason, and we may not know that reason. But God, I pray right now that your hand of protection is about each and every one of them. That your heart is there because their heart is in you. That they called you and want you to answer them. Lord, with all the things that are going on today, we just praise you even more. We worship you, oh God, because of who you are and not what you give. Lord, help us to understand who we are in you, that we may change for the better, that we may be able to walk in Jesus' footsteps and do the things that he did in your honor. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your coming out, sitting around the table, and having an honest conversation.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Conversation, you know,
I think you were pretty honest. There's a lot of history there.
Yeah.
Every desire is now satisfied.